Since childhood, they told him his dreams were impossible. How could someone who couldn't see solve complex mathematical problems? But when a teacher challenged him publicly, he proved that his mind was sharper than any doubtful glance. On his first day at the prestigious Monterrey Institute of Technology, Cuernavaca campus, Matthew knew things wouldn't be different. His mother, Dolores, had fought for years to secure him a full scholarship. Now, sitting in the advanced mathematics classroom, he could feel the curious and pitying stares he despised so much. "Good morning, students," the deep voice of Professor Javier Mendoza echoed through the room. "This semester we'll be studying differential equations. It won't be easy, and not everyone is cut out for this level." Matthew felt the professor stop in front of his desk. The silence grew heavy. "Mr. Alvarez, I understand you have a special condition," Mendoza said, his tone wavering between curiosity and disdain. "How do you expect to follow my explanations if you can't see what I write on the board?" Some students chuckled under their breaths. Matthew felt the heat rise to his cheeks, but maintained his composure. He had been through this before. "I may. Listen and memorize, Professor," he replied calmly. "My mind is my chalkboard." Mendoza let out a short, dry laugh. "Very poetic, Mr. Alvarez, but advanced mathematics requires spatial visualization. This isn't a literature course." The class continued, and Matthew listened intently to every word. His assistant, Lucia Fuentes, a senior student assigned by the university's inclusion program, occasionally whispered clarifications about what the professor was writing. At the end of the class, as students began packing up, Mendoza issued a challenge. "Before you leave, a problem to think about," he said, quickly writing on the board. "Whoever solves it first gets extra credit, a non-linear differential equation. Let's see who has real talent." Lucia began describing the equation to Matthew, but Mendoza interrupted. "Miss Fuentes, let young Alvarez try on his own. After all, he says his mind is his chalkboard." The tension in the room was palpable. Matthew clenched his fists under the desk. "Professor," Lucia interjected, "that's not fair." "Life isn't fair, Miss Fuentes," Mendoza replied, "and in my class everyone faces the same challenges." "Tell me the equation," Matthew said firmly. The professor recited the complex equation with a tone that made it clear he expected the young man to fail. The entire class watched, some uncomfortably, others with morbid curiosity. Matthew closed his eyes, though for him it made no difference. In his mind, numbers and symbols took shape, organizing into patterns only he could perceive, while his classmates scribbled frantically in their notebooks. He navigated an invisible mathematical labyrinth. "7," he finally said with confidence. The silence that followed was absolute. Mendoza frowned, checked his own calculations, and paled slightly. "Correct," he admitted with evident surprise. "But surely it was luck. Let's try something more complex." He dictated another equation, even more difficult. The entire class held its breath. "Square root of 13, approximately 3,606, Matthew replied without hesitation. Mendoza's expression shifted from disbelief to irritation. Some students began murmuring, impressed. "How do you do it?" asked a voice from the back of the room. It was Edward Vega, one of the brightest students in the institute. Matthew smiled slightly. "I build mental models," he explained. "Each number, each symbol has a texture, a weight, a position in my mind. I organize them like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle." The explanation captivated the class. Even Mendoza, despite his wounded pride, couldn't hide his fascination. "Impressive, Mr. Alvarez," he conceded finally. "It seems I underestimated you." As they left the classroom, Edward approached Matthew. "That was incredible," he said with genuine admiration. "My sister Sophia is just as brilliant as you, but she dropped out because no one believed in her. You should meet her." "Your sister?" Matthew asked curiously. "Yes, Sophia Vega. She works in the campus library, but she has a gift for numbers she's never been able to fully develop." That afternoon, Lucia accompanied Matthew to the library. The smell of old books and the comforting silence reminded him why he loved the place so much. "Edward told me his sister works here," Matthew commented. Sofia Vega. "Oh yes," Lucia replied. "She's in the math section at the back. She's very reserved." Matthew walked with his cane to where Lucia had directed him. He could hear the soft sound of pages being sorted. "Sophia?" he asked. "Yes," replied a soft but firm voice. "Do you need a particular book?" "My name is Matthew Alvarez. Your brother Edward told me about you." There was a brief silence. "Ah, you're the boy everyone's talking about," Sophia said. "The one who left the fearsome Professor Mendoza speechless." Matthew smiled. "It wasn't my intention to embarrass him," he explained. "I just wanted to prove I belong here like any other student." "I understand that better than you think," Sophia replied. "I've also had to fight against those who said I couldn't." "Edward mentioned you have a talent for math." Sophia chuckled softly. "Had. Now I'm just the library girl." Something in her tone caught Matthew's attention, a mix of resignation and longing that felt painfully familiar. "Why did you stop studying?" he asked. "It's complicated," she replied, and Matthew could tell he had touched a nerve. Some people build walls so high it's easier to give up than try to climb them. Before Matthew could respond, a voice interrupted their conversation. "Vega," called the library director. "I need you to organize the new material that arrived this morning." "I have to go," Sophia said. "It was nice meeting you, Matthew Alvarez. I hope you have better luck than I did in this place." Matthew was intrigued. There was something about Sophia, a spark that had dimmed but not gone out, that sparked a deep interest in him. It wasn't just her obvious intelligence or her melodic voice. It was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone who, like him, had been unfairly judged. What Matthew didn't know was that this casual encounter in the library would mark the beginning of an extraordinary alliance that would shake the foundations of the prestigious institute and change both their lives forever. In the following days, Matthew couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. There was something in her voice, in the way she spoke about mathematics, like someone talking about a lost love, that resonated deeply with him. During Professor Mendoza's classes, who now treated him with a mix of reluctant respect and distrust, Matthew found himself distracted, formulating excuses to return to the library. "You're very thoughtful today," Lucia commented as she guided him through the halls after class. "Is it because of the Math Olympiad they announced this morning?" Matthew stopped. "What Olympiad?" "The Institute organizes an annual competition," Lucia explained. "The best math students compete by solving highly complex problems. The winner gets a full scholarship for graduate studies at any university in the country." An idea began forming in Matthew's mind. Who can participate? Any enrolled student. This year, Professor Mendoza is the main organizer, so the level will be extraordinarily high. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "I need you to take me to the library." In the quiet of the math section, Matthew waited patiently until he heard Sophia's soft footsteps. "You came back," she said, and Matthew noticed a slight tone of surprise in her voice. "I wanted to know more about your story," Matthew replied, "and also talk to you about the Math Olympiad." Sophia was silent for a moment. "My story isn't interesting," she said finally, "and I don't participate in competitions." "Why not? Edward says you're brilliant." "My brother exaggerates," she replied, though Matthew sensed the hidden pride in her voice. "Besides, competitions are for students, and I just work here." "You could go back to studying," Matthew suggested. "It's not too late." Sophia let out a dry laugh. "Do you know why I left university, Matthew?" Her voice grew serious. "I was in my third semester when Professor Humberto Rivas, head of the math department, accused me of cheating on an exam. According to him, it was impossible for someone like me, a woman from a humble background in San Cristobal de las Casas, to achieve such perfect results without outside help. Matthew felt indignation growing within him. What happened? "I filed a formal complaint, but no one believed me. It was my word against that of a respected professor with 30 years of experience," Sophia continued. "They offered me the chance to confess in exchange for a light suspension, but I refused. I'd rather leave the university than admit to something I didn't do." "That's unfair," Matthew murmured. "The world is full of injustices, Matthew," Sophia replied bitterly. "Some people can overcome them like you. Others give up." Matthew reached out until he found Sophia's arm. "You didn't give up. You're here surrounded by the books you love, keeping your passion alive even if it's in silence." Sophia didn't respond immediately. Matthew could feel her breathing, slightly uneven. "Do you know what's most painful?" she said finally. "That Professor Rivas will be one of the judges in that Olympiad you mentioned." Matthew understood. Then why Edward had wanted him to meet Sophia. It wasn't a coincidence. "Join me," he proposed suddenly, "as my assistant. The rules allow me to have support because of my condition." "What?" "No, that's ridiculous. I can't face Rivas again." "You wouldn't. I'd face him with your help. We'd be a team." In the following days, Matthew visited the library every afternoon. At first, Sophia was reluctant, but gradually she began to open up. While organizing books, she told him about fascinating theorems and explained complex concepts with a clarity no professor had ever achieved. Matthew, in turn, shared his mental visualization techniques. He taught her how he turned numbers and equations into three-dimensional landscapes he could navigate in his mind. Sophia listened, fascinated, beginning to understand how Matthew's extraordinary mind worked. One afternoon, as they worked together on a particularly complex problem, Professor Mendoza surprised them in the library. "I see you found a tutor, Mr. Alvarez," he commented suspiciously. "Interesting choice." Sophia visibly tensed. "Sophia is my friend," Matthew clarified. "She helps me access study materials." Mendoza stared at Sophia as if trying to remember something. "You seem familiar, Miss Vega," she replied coldly. "Sophia Vega." Recognition lit up Mendoza's face. "Ah yes, the student who dropped out after that incident with Professor Rivas." Sophia paled. "That was a long time ago," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Not so long," Mendoza replied. "And, coincidentally, now you're assisting Mr. Alvarez, who has mathematical abilities as exceptional as the ones you demonstrated." The implication was clear, and Matthew felt anger rising within him. "Professor Mendoza," he said in a controlled voice, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't insinuate things you can't prove." Mendoza smiled smugly. "I'm just pointing out interesting coincidences, Mr. Alvarez. The Math Olympiad is a prestigious event. It would be a shame if it were tainted by any kind of irregularity." When Mendoza walked away, Sophia was trembling. "I told you," she murmured. "This was a bad idea. Now they'll suspect you too." "Let them suspect," Matthew replied with determination. "They can't prove anything because there's nothing to prove. We're just studying, like any other student." That night, in his small apartment on the outskirts of Cuernavaca, Matthew couldn't sleep. Mendoza's words echoed in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had questioned his abilities, but now it involved Sophia, and that infuriated him. He took his phone and, using the voice assistant, called Edward. "I need to know exactly what happened with your sister and Professor Rivas," he said without preamble. Edward sighed on the other end of the line. "It was 3 years ago. Sophia was the best student in the department, but she never fit in. We're not from a wealthy family like most students here. Our parents are rural teachers in Chiapas." Matthew listened intently as Edward recounted how Sophia had developed a new method for solving certain types of differential equations, something Professor Rivas considered impossible for a third-semester student. He accused her of plagiarizing the work of some professional mathematician, Edward continued. When she insisted it was her original method, he challenged her to prove it by solving a similar problem in front of an evaluation committee. And what happened? On the day of the test, Sophia was so nervous she made a simple mistake at the beginning. That was enough for Rivas. He declared it was proof she couldn't reproduce her supposed method because it had never been hers. "That's absurd," Matthew protested. "Anyone can make a mistake under pressure." "For someone like Rivas, mistakes are unforgivable," Edward explained, "especially coming from someone like Sophia, whom he had already decided to blame." The conversation with Edward only strengthened Matthew's resolve. It wasn't just about proving his own worth anymore. It was about helping Sophia reclaim what had been unjustly taken from her, her confidence and her passion for mathematics. The next day, Matthew arrived early at the library. He could sense Sophia's presence even before she spoke. "I've been thinking about something all night," Sophia said, her voice revealing she hadn't slept well either. "That method I developed years ago, I think it could be adapted to solve the kind of problems that usually appear in the Olympiad." Matthew smiled. "I knew you hadn't completely given up." "It's not for me," she clarified quickly. "It's for you. You deserve to win that scholarship." Over the next few weeks, Matthew and Sophia worked tirelessly. In the mornings, he attended classes, enduring Mendoza's increasingly evident insinuations. In the afternoons, they met in the library or at Sophia's small apartment, where she had created three-dimensional models for Matthew to touch and better understand certain geometric concepts. What began as a strategic alliance gradually transformed into something deeper. Matthew admired Sophia's brilliance as much as her resilience. She, in turn, found in him not only an exceptional student, but someone who truly saw her for who she was, without prejudice or expectations. One afternoon, as they worked on a particularly challenging problem, their hands met over a mathematical model. Neither of them pulled away. "What's it like?" Sophia asked suddenly. "What?" "Seeing the world with other senses, perceiving what others can't." Matthew thought for a moment. "It's like everyone has an incomplete map of the territory," he explained. "They see colors and shapes I can't imagine, but I perceive textures, sounds, and patterns they ignore." Sophia gently squeezed his hand. "I think I understand," she said. "I also see patterns where others only see random numbers. It's like mathematics speaks to me in a secret language." "Exactly," Matthew agreed, feeling a deep connection. "And it's frustrating when others assume your map is inferior just because it's different." At that moment, something shifted between them. The invisible barrier they had maintained began to fade. They weren't just two brilliant minds collaborating. They were two people who had found in each other a refuge against a world that had tried to limit them. The day of the Math Olympiad registration arrived sooner than expected. Matthew, with Sophia as his official assistant, submitted his application. The news that the blind student would compete spread quickly across campus. Some saw it as inspiring, others, including Professor Mendoza and Professor Rivas, as an anomaly that needed to be carefully monitored. What no one knew was that Matthew and Sophia had developed a revolutionary method together, combining his mental visualization with her theoretical innovations. A method they were confident would give them victory, not just in the competition, but against all those who had tried to define what they could or couldn't achieve. But as the day of the Cours Olympiad approached, tensions rose. Rumors about possible irregularities began circulating. Edward warned his sister that Rivas and Mendoza had been seen arguing heatedly about how to handle the Alvarez problem. The night before the big competition, Matthew received an unexpected call from the Institute's director. "Mr. Alvarez," he said gravely, "I need you to come to my office early tomorrow. Some concerns have arisen about your participation in the Olympiad." The office of Director Alejandro Garza smelled of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee. Matthew, sitting across from the imposing desk, kept his back straight and his expression calm, though inside anxiety threatened to overflow. Beside him, Sophia remained silent, her controlled breathing betraying her own unease. "Mr. Alvarez, Miss Vega," the director began, his deep voice resonating in the room. "I've called you here because certain concerns have reached my ears regarding your participation in the Math Olympiad." Matthew nodded slightly. "I imagine those concerns come from Professor Mendoza and Professor Rivas." Director Garza paused. "Significantly. Indeed, both professors have expressed concerns about the possibility of undue collaboration." Sophia visibly tensed. "Director Garza," she interjected firmly, "if you're insinuating that I'm helping Matthew cheat—" "I'm not insinuating anything, Miss Vega," the director interrupted, raising a conciliatory hand. "I'm merely presenting the concerns that have been brought to me. As director, I must investigate any allegations of academic dishonesty. Matthew clenched his fists on his lap. What evidence do they have? He asked directly. The director sighed. None concrete, only circumstantial. Professor Rivas points out a certain irony in you. A student with a visual disability receiving assistance precisely from someone who was accused of academic dishonesty in the past. Unjustly accused, Matthew clarified, unable to hide his indignation. And now they want to repeat the same injustice with me. Director Garza leaned back in his chair, studying the two young people before him. Something in his gaze softened slightly. Personally, he said in a lower tone, I was never convinced of the accusations against Miss Vega, but as director, I must maintain a certain institutional neutrality. Sophia looked up surprised. Then why didn't you do anything when I was accused? Institutional policies, departmental pressure. The director made a vague gesture with his hand. Excuses, I know. It's not something I'm proud of. Antiu. Uncomfortable silence followed. What's the purpose of this meeting? Director. To offer you both a chance to prove that you've been judged unfairly, Director Garza said, leaning forward and interlacing his fingers on the desk. I've proposed a modification to the competition format. Matthew and Sophia exchanged a confused glance. Instead of working on pre-selected problems from the organizing committee, the director explained, the problems will be randomly generated by an algorithm on the day of the event. This will eliminate any suspicion of specific prior preparation. That doesn't solve anything, Sophia protested. If Matthew wins, they'll still say he cheated. I'm not finished, the director continued. I've also proposed that each participant solve the problems in separate cubicles, monitored by cameras. In your case, Matthew, you'll be allowed to dictate your answers to a neutral transcriber, not Miss Vega. Matthew processed the information quickly. And who will that transcriber be? Professor Carmen Ortiz from the physics department. She has no connection to any of the participants or judges and has worked previously with visually impaired students. The proposal was reasonable, but Matthew sensed there was more to it. Why are you doing this, Director? He asked directly. Why now? Director Garza was silent for a moment, as if weighing his words. 3 years ago, I made a mistake by not defending a brilliant student who was unjustly accused, he admitted finally, looking at Sophia. I can't change the past, but I can ensure history doesn't repeat itself. That afternoon, news of the changes to the Olympiad format spread across campus. Reactions were mixed. Some applauded the added transparency. Others, particularly Professors Mendoza and Rivas, expressed dissatisfaction with the last-minute changes. In the library, Matthew and Sophia tried to focus on their final preparations. I don't know whether to feel relieved or more worried, Sophia confessed, distractedly flipping through an advanced calculus book. The director seems to be on our side, but Mendoza and Rivas won't back down easily. Matthew reached out and found her hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said firmly, we've already won. You've helped me prepare better than I ever imagined, and I've helped you reconnect with mathematics. Sophia squeezed his hand. It's more than that, Matthew, she said softly. You've helped me believe in myself again. The morning of the Olympiad dawned clear and bright. The Institute's main auditorium had been transformed. Individual cubicles occupied the stage, each equipped with a desk, chair, and surveillance camera. In the front rows, the judges watched intently as participants took their places. Matthew was led to his cubicle by Professor Carmen Ortiz, a middle-aged woman with a kind voice and steady hands. Everything's ready, Matthew, she explained as she helped him sit. I'll read the problems to you and transcribe your answers. Take all the time you need. In the stands, Sophia sat beside her brother Edward, both visibly tense. Not far away, Professors Mendoza and Rivas conversed in low voices, occasionally, glancing toward Matthew's cubicle. Welcome to the 20th Math Olympiad of the Monterrey Institute of Technology, Cuernavaca campus, Director Garza announced. This year, as you've been informed, we've implemented some modifications to ensure transparency and fairness in the process. From her seat, Sophia could see Matthew, his posture upright and his expression focused. A wave of pride washed over her. Regardless of the outcome, he had already shown more courage and determination than any other student she knew. Director Garza activated the algorithm that would generate the problems. On large screens, equations of extraordinary complexity appeared. A murmur swept through the auditorium. "These problems are significantly harder than in previous years," Edward whispered to his sister. Sophia studied the equations, her mind automatically working through possible solutions. "They're complicated, yes," she admitted, "but Matthew can solve them." In his cubicle, Matthew listened intently as Professor Ortiz read him the first problem. It was a non-linear differential equation with multiple variables and complex boundary conditions. He closed his eyes, as he always did when he needed to concentrate, and began constructing his mental model. In his mind, the variables transformed into three-dimensional shapes that moved and interacted. Where others saw symbols on paper, he perceived a living, dynamic mathematical landscape. The techniques he had developed with Sophia allowed him to navigate this landscape with astonishing precision. "The solution to the first problem is 5.382, he finally dictated. "The limit converges exactly to that value as variable t approaches infinity." Professor Ortiz transcribed the answer, unable to completely hide her astonishment at the speed and confidence with which Matthew had solved a problem that would take most participants at least half an hour. Meanwhile, in the stands, Sophia watched as the other contestants struggled with the first problem. Some scribbled frantically, others stared at the ceiling for inspiration. Professor Rivas approached Director Garza and whispered something in his ear, discreetly pointing toward Matthew's cubicle. "I think they're questioning how quickly Matthew solved the first problem," Edward murmured. Sophia clenched her fists. "They can't stand that someone they underestimated is more brilliant than they are." By the third problem, the entire auditorium was silent, focused on the competition. The judges reviewed the answers to the first and second problems. Matthew had solved both correctly, as had two other participants, Edward Vega and Daniela Morelos, now senior known for her brilliance. The fourth problem was different. It not only required finding a mathematical solution, but also explaining the method used to arrive at it. It was precisely the type of problem Sophia had been accused of cheating on 3 years earlier. In his cubicle, Matthew felt a chill run down his spine. He recognized the structure of the problem. It was similar to one Sophia had shown him, one she had solved using her innovative method for which she had been unjustly accused. "This is a non-convex optimization problem," he dictated to Professor Ortiz. "The traditional approach would fail here because it assumes a Gaussian distribution of critical values." He paused, carefully considering his next words. Using Sophia's method would be the most efficient way to solve the problem, but it could also raise suspicions. However, he decided that the truth was more important than appearances. "I propose an alternative approach," he continued. "Instead of seeking local extrema, we'll transform the solution space using a hyperbolic projection." As he dictated his method, Professor Ortiz transcribed it faithfully, though it was evident she didn't fully understand what she was writing. In the stands, Sophia immediately recognized her own method, now refined and improved by Matthew's brilliant mind. Professor Rivas also recognized it. His face turned pale, then red with indignation. He stood abruptly and approached Director Garza, speaking with obvious agitation. "What's happening?" Edward asked, worried. "Rivas recognized my method," Sophia replied, her voice barely audible. "But now he can't accuse Matthew of cheating. He's solving the problem live in front of everyone." The tension was palpable as Matthew finished dictating his answer. When he finally concluded, an absolute silence fell over the auditorium. The judges conferred, visibly confused by the innovative approach. It was Director Garza who took the initiative. "Professor Rivas," he said, standing, "you're our expert in non-convex optimization. Could you verify this solution?" Rivas slowly approached the paper where Matthew's answer was transcribed. He read it once, then again. His expression shifted from indignation to confusion, and finally to a mix of awe and resignation. "The solution is correct," he admitted finally. "The method is unorthodox, but mathematically sound. In fact, it's brilliant." A murmur swept through the auditorium. Sophia covered her mouth with her hands, trying to contain her emotion. Edward hugged her, whispering in her ear, "You did it, sis. Through him, but you did it." The final problem was the most challenging of all. A topological conjecture requiring not only numerical resolution, but also a formal proof. By the time it was due, only 3 participants remained: Matthew, Edward, and Daniela. The answers were reviewed privately by the judging committee. The wait felt endless. Finally, Director Garza took the stage with the results envelope. "Third place, Edward Vega," he announced. Edward smiled, satisfied. "Second place, Daniela Morelos." The tension was unbearable. Sophia could barely breathe. "And first place, with a perfect score and solutions that, according to our judges, redefine the approach to non-convex optimization problems, Matthew Alvarez." The auditorium erupted in applause. Professor Ortiz helped Matthew to the stage, where Director Garza presented him with the trophy and scholarship certificate. "Congratulations, young Alvarez," the director said. "You've demonstrated extraordinary talent." Matthew held the microphone with slightly trembling hands. "Thank you, Director. This achievement isn't mine alone. I want to dedicate it to someone who taught me that true limits aren't in our bodies or circumstances, but in the barriers others build and we accept." He paused, turning toward where he knew Sophia was sitting. "Sophia Vega, would you please come to the stage?" A stunned silence filled the auditorium. Sophia, tears in her eyes, made her way to the stage. Matthew reached out and found her hand. "The method I used to solve the 4th problem was originally developed by Sophia 3 years ago when she was a student here," Matthew declared clearly and firmly. "A method for which she was unjustly accused of plagiarism, when in fact it was a brilliant innovation ahead of its time." The auditorium fell completely silent. All eyes turned to Professor Rivas, who seemed to have shrunk in his seat. "Today, I haven't just won a competition," Matthew continued. "We've vindicated a brilliant mind that was nearly lost to prejudice and assumptions." Director Garza took the microphone. "I believe it's time to correct an institutional error," he said, addressing Sophia directly. "Miss Vega, on behalf of the Institute, I'd like to offer you a formal apology and the opportunity to complete your studies with a full scholarship, if you so choose." Tears streamed down Sophia's face. "I'll consider it, Director," she replied, her voice breaking. "But there's something I need to do first." She turned to Matthew and on impulse hugged him. The auditorium erupted in applause once more. That night, in the small cafe across from campus, Matthew and Sophia celebrated with Edward and a few friends. The atmosphere was jubilant. "So, what's next for the 2 math geniuses?" Edward asked, raising his coffee cup in a toast. Matthew smiled, his fingers interlaced with Sophia's under the table. "I was thinking of a more permanent collaboration," he said. "There's a math research center in Mexico City that's interested in our combined method." "Our method?" Sophia asked, surprised. "Of course," Matthew replied seriously. "I couldn't have refined it without your initial guidance, and you couldn't have applied it in new contexts without my approach. Together, we're more than the sum of our parts." Sophia squeezed his hand, moved. "Like a perfectly balanced equation," she murmured. "Exactly," Matthew agreed. "And I think we have many more equations to solve together." As the night wore on, Sophia watched Matthew interact with his friends. She thought of the long journey they had both taken. Him, overcoming the barriers others had placed in his path. Her reclaiming her faith in herself and her talent. She remembered that first afternoon in the library when she thought her passion for mathematics was irretrievably lost. Now, looking toward the future, she saw a horizon full of possibilities, equations to solve and theorems to prove. But most of all, she saw a life where she no longer had to prove her worth to anyone but herself. Because in the end, Both Matthew and Sophia had learned the most important lesson, that a person's true ability isn't measured by what others believe they can or can't do, but by the strength of their determination to define their own limits. And together, they were discovering that those limits were infinitely broader than anyone had imagined.